Once again, we asked wunderkind Tim Burton to reflect on himself.
No one else makes anything like what he does. No one sees things the way he does.
His uniquely dark and melancholy vision has entranced audiences worldwide.
His films have entertained millions.
It's showtime.
Their heroes have become pop culture icons. Their appeal is at once international and universal. Yet each bears an unmistakable personal imprint, unlike any other in the world of cinema. And yet, until now, the man responsible for their realization, a young filmmaker named Tim Burton, has remained an enigma.
Tim Burton grew up feeling like an outsider, and although he became one of Hollywood's top directors, for him, balancing artistic expression and mainstream success is an ongoing quest.
He's his own person, and it has always been. I mean, he's marched to a different drummer.
We all have a dark side. I think that the difference is that he is able to create something meaningful, beautiful from that dark side.
America, 1958. Eisenhower was in the White House. NASA launched Explorer 1, and Walt Disney was putting the finishing touches on his newest animated feature, Sleeping Beauty. That same year, in the Los Angeles suburb of Burbank, Timothy William Burton was born on August 25th. Tim's mother, Ricky, worked part-time in a photo lab and later owned a gift shop for cat lovers. His father, Bill, had played minor league baseball and now worked as a park supervisor in town. Tim was a sensitive child who, along with his younger brother Daniel, enjoyed playing in the front yard, weekend outings to the beach, but what the youngster loved most of all was goofing around with Dad.
My husband was their big brother. He'd go out in the front yard and wrestle with the kids in his good suits, and I was the mean one. I was the one, I'm here. You have to listen to me now.
In 1963, Tim entered Providencia Elementary School. The happy, well-adjusted student flourished in his art classes and music lessons.
Well, Ho-Hum wasn't exactly a kid's clown. He was later arrested on a 12-state crime spree, but boy, he sure knew how to put on a show. Well, he used balloon animals to reenact famous events from world history, like the assassination of Julius Caesar.
Oh, what a great idea!
And the Nuremberg trials.
You're a mean Nazi! I was only following orders.
Ho-Hum, I think, was the first real adult influence in Tim's life. It was Ho-Hum who first opened Tim up to an appreciation of art.
But he couldn't get enough of the classic black and white chillers running on late-night TV.
He'd want to watch one of these gruesome movies, and I wouldn't watch them, so he'd con his father into watching them with him, and get up in the morning. Bill would say, I had nightmares. You know, Tim said, I thought it was great.
For the little boy with a vivid imagination, the dark and intriguing world on the screen seemed far more exotic than his own neat and tidy neighborhood.
Burbank was a planned community, measured little streets with trees nicely lined up. As a kid, there wasn't a whole lot to do in Burbank save go to the movies.
By the age of 10, Tim was hooked on horror and would spend his weekly allowance on monster magazines and fright fests at the local cinema.
You know, at the specific time that I grew up in sort of suburbia, I did feel different. And it was strange. I found it quite strange. It's just because you like monster movies, people thought you were weird, you know, which I always felt was an odd thing, because it's like, well, if I liked musicals or westerns, would people think you're weird, you know? And so it didn't seem that unnatural to me. But it was quite interesting how quickly you get sort of categorized as a child, you know. And I saw that with other kids, you know. You're good at this, you're bad at that, and you sort of, the kids kind of got separated into different categories. And so I think I've always been aware of that, and I think that's why I like movies like Frankenstein, where, you know, you look at the character and he's perceived as a monster, even though he isn't really. He's just different. And the angry villagers, you know, it was easy to sort of identify that with your neighbors. And, you know, the sort of mad scientist. I always wanted to be a mad scientist. So, you know, all those kind of things made it easy to identify with those kind of movies.
It seems like one of your great outlets as a kid, and still was drawing and remains drawing, and artistic creativity. And when did you first sort of experiment with drawing? And when was the first time somebody told you that you were talented at it?
Well, I don't know if that anybody ever really did. I think I always, again, it felt quite natural. It felt like, you know, every kid liked to draw, you know. I mean, you look at kids' drawings that are, you know, I go to like my kids' school and I see all their kids' drawings. They're all great, you know. They're all interesting, and you can see the joy of it, the fun of it. And I think that most children enjoy that as I did. And I think as you get older, you know, certain teachers say that, well, no, you're not good at this, or you should draw like that. And I think I remember at one point getting frustrated with that and just deciding, well, forget, I'm just going to draw the way I wanted to draw and not worry so much about, you know, what other people thought of it, and just enjoyed doing it as a thing. So I was lucky enough to just kind of break through all that and just not worry so much about my ability and just go with the enjoyment value of it. And I had a couple of teachers that were quite supportive that way and just sort of letting you be who you were.
Right.
And so I think that was more of the issue than, you know, I had a couple of teachers that were supportive, I'd say.
An average all-American boy who ironically grew up in the shadow of Hollywood's great motion picture studios. It was a shadow that would follow him for the rest of his life. We asked Tim Burton's parents to describe his unique childhood.
Oh, well, I'd have to say that he was a perfectly normal boy in every way, I think.
Well, as a matter of fact, he was so normal it was, well, troubling. Almost scary, eerie, freaky, weird, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, weird.
Whether as a result of being the middle child or as a reaction to being raised in Burbank, Tim was forced to seek an escape from what he regarded as an oppressive reality.
Because Tim and I are manic depressives, and we love black. We love to sit in a dark room and talk about graveyards.
Why, on Turkey Day, he always insisted on carving the bird.
Oh, it's children!
All the kids had a chore to do. Our little daughter would bring the cookies to Santa and the carrots for the reindeer.
Hi, Daddy.
And our other son hung the stockings. But Tim, he insisted on decorating the tree by himself. He was always using his head. Well, even back then, he paid great attention to detail.
Possibly he would get coal for Christmas in his stocking, but that he would like it, that would be sort of his favorite present.
But Tim's favorite pastime by far was watching the films of the terrifying yet elegant Vincent Price. Instead of being scared by the macabre characters, Tim identified with Price's sensitive outsiders who just didn't fit in. Tim's taste in films fueled his imagination, and he spent hours with his younger brother sketching their favorite monsters.
My husband used to bring home these big pads that were like drafting type sheets, you know, just huge ones, and they'd turn the television on and sit there and draw.
Tim continued to indulge his love of drawing. He even won first place for designing an anti-litter campaign, which was displayed on Burbank garbage trucks. Although Tim got along with everyone at school, he never felt as if he truly belonged.
I don't think anyone realized, you know, how deep Tim was. I mean, very emotional person, but, you know, didn't show his emotions outwardly. I mean, he had that very deep sensitivity about the world.
Tim was an expert at concealing his emotions, but at home, he could no longer hide a stubborn streak that often led to clashes with his mom. By age 17, he realized it was time for him to move out of the family house. The teenager packed his bags and moved a few blocks to his grandmother's, where he found the freedom he was looking for. He surrounded himself with like-minded artistic types whose idea of fun was spending nights and weekends working on creative projects.
Our whole high school time was about making movies. and being creative together. And there was a group of us, about 4 of us, who really became tight and met another couple people who joined our first little filmmaking crew for Tim's Super 8 horror film.
By his senior year, Tim knew he wanted to channel his passion for art and filmmaking into a lifelong career. In 1976, Burton won a scholarship to the California Institute of the Arts, where he enrolled in the Disney-sponsored character animation program, along with future Toy Story director John Lasseter. Even among such a unique and offbeat bunch, Tim stood out.
I'll never forget actually looking at Tim's sketchbook for the first time, because his sketchbook was unbelievable.
You just flip every page and it was just like this exquisite, extraordinary design, character, person, and you'd ask him, like, where did you get the idea to do this? He'd go, oh, I was just walking around the mall and that was some chick that was walking down to the shoe store.
Although Tim's talents were undeniable, the unorthodox artist was frustrated by the school's traditional animation formulas. To make matters worse, in 1978, he lost his scholarship due to an administrative error. Burton panicked and scraped by on student loans he had no idea how to pay off. But the next year, when Tim screened a short animated film at school, things began to look up.
He had done a pencil test at Cal Arts on this mad scientist trying to anesthetize this helpless victim. So I said, let's put it in color, let's put it in 35 millimeter and become big-time movie makers. He just kept looking down and said to me, I want to be a director. I want to do this. Let's do this.
Stalk of the Celery Monster had also piqued the interest of Disney's recruiters. Tim was stunned when the world-famous studio offered him a job, and in the summer of 1979, the 20-year-old headed off to work at the happiest place on earth. Trouble was, he got there several decades too late. Tim hated his first job, confined to drawing adorable, big-eyed characters for the studio's newest project, The Fox and the Hound. He had higher hopes for his next assignment, the gothic fantasy The Black Cauldron, but was bitterly disappointed when all of his uniquely off-kilter drawings were rejected. Tim grew so disheartened that he began sleeping 14 hours a day and hiding under his desk when people came into the office. He did anything to break up the monotony.
Every now and then something odd might happen with Tim, like, where is he? And you find him in a closet staring for like 5 hours. You okay, Tim? Just keep staring. You just kind of got used to the idea that now and then Tim's going to do something odd.
He had had his wisdom teeth removed, all 4 of his wisdom teeth, I guess, and he had these things that were going to stanch the blood flow. At lunchtime then, or whatever, he took these pads out and basically just started oozing blood as he was sitting there. I don't know if Tim was trying to sort of be the tormented hero, the sort of Edgar Allan Poe, Vincent Price, misunderstood artist.
But by now, Tim knew he needed to focus his offbeat antics on more ambitious projects for the screen, as a director. By 1981, 22-year-old Tim Burton had lived the past 2.5 years as an anonymous Disney employee while creating oddball movies with his friends on the weekends. But he had also been spending long nights working on a more personal project, a twisted ode to his childhood hero that was about to change his career.
So my sense of your experience at Disney came to be very frustrating. Is that correct?
Well, part of it is I wasn't very good at their style of animation. I think that was the key. And the films they were making there weren't, it wasn't the golden years of Disney animation. You know what I mean? It was kind of the probably some might consider the darker days in the history of the studio. But I think that also, even though I wasn't good at it, they recognized that after a while, I got the opportunity to just draw and do different things, which was a great, it was kind of unheard of. I got to sit in a room for a year, just draw things for Black Cauldron, whatever I wanted to draw, and then once that didn't pan out, I got to draw things for other projects, and none of which really panned out, but then that gave me the opportunity to do Vincent and then Frankenweenie. So I was, even though it was a strange time in the company's history, I got a lot of interesting, strange opportunities to just explore things. I got the opportunity to do Vincent, which then got me the opportunity to do Frankenweenie. At the same time, it was a time when I developed like Nightmare Before Christmas. So there was a lot of things. There was a lot of things that were happening then that were very important to me, and to be sort of left in a weird vacuum was great for me. You know, like slightly frustrating. It was still amazing.
23-year-old Tim Burton showed two of the studio's younger executives a poem that he had written and illustrated based on his childhood fascination with Vincent Price. Tom Wilhite and Julie Hickson loved the offbeat, somber tale and decided to let Burton transform it into an animated short entitled Vincent.
Tom Wilhite got Vincent Price to do the narration. It was probably the greatest day of Tim's life, to meet his hero.
He saw in me a persona of the unreal, somebody who he knew was a guy named Vincent Price, but at the same time this fellow was a little unreal, and that intrigued him. He wanted to identify with somebody who was real but unreal.
Do you remember the first time that you saw Vincent Price on screen?
Oh yeah, I mean, it was all those movies, those Roger Corman films, and things like The Tingler, and I think it was the Roger Corman films because it was those were the ones where you kind of felt like a character who was, you know, going, the sort of melodramatic nature of him, and the sort of somebody going insane, and the kind of seeing things and hearing things. It's just something that I guess unfortunately I could relate to. I mean, it was stuff that kind of character was something that just sort of psychologically spoke to me. I mean, that's why, you know, I sent him this thing, Vincent, and he responded in a letter, and it's basically helped get the movie made, you know, because of his, you know,
this was the stop motion animation.
Yeah, it was 5-minute, first thing I ever did at Disney, and you know, he helped get it made just by thinking, yeah, you know, he loved to narrate it, and I also felt really, not knowing the person, I felt like he understood. He felt, I could feel he didn't feel like I was just like a fan. He got the sort of, I felt the meaning of it, which made me feel really good too. So it was the first really great experience I had in Hollywood, really.
Tim spent months using the painstaking technique of stop-motion animation to create the 6-minute short about a boy with very unusual interests.
It showed that the person who had written it got the essence of what those Poe films were about. And the little boy, Vincent Malloy, in the piece, feels like this hypersensitive, creative outcast, and my father loved it.
Tim was proud of his first professional film. But even though Disney had commissioned the odd little movie, they had no idea what to do with it. And after a few screenings at film festivals, Vincent was locked away in the studio vault. Burton was disappointed by Disney's lack of enthusiasm, but he was determined to prove that he had what it took to be a director, and took on 2 more short films. First was a Japanese-themed Hansel and Gretel, and then the black comedy Frankenweenie, starring Shelley Duvall and Daniel Stern, about a boy who reanimates his dog after it's hit by a car. But the Motion Picture Association slapped the quirky short with a PG rating, claiming it was too disturbing for young children. Tim was disheartened when it, too, ended up in storage. Tim Burton had seen 5 years of work result in 3 shelved projects, and the 26-year-old feared that his unique vision might never be seen by the general public. In 1985, Burton got the opportunity he was looking for when innovative comic Paul Reubens gave him a call. Reubens had become a household name thanks to his popular TV character, Pee Wee Herman. He was now planning to bring Pee Wee to the big screen and was ready to give inexperienced Tim Burton his feature film debut.
We screened Frankenweenie, and 2 minutes, maybe not even that long into the film, I knew that was the guy. I just knew he was the director.
Burton also kept the fun going by hiring his favorite musician, Danny Elfman. The lead singer of the new wave band Oingo Boingo had never scored a feature film before.
We were both babes in the woods, so to speak, because I didn't quite know how to begin, and he didn't know how to tell me to begin. It was more like goofing around than anything else.
26-year-old Tim Burton had a surprise hit on his hands. The fledgling director was now inundated with scripts and set up an office with friend Rick Heinrichs. But Tim turned down every offer frustrated that most of them were copycat versions of Pee-wee.
Tim's not exactly a director for hire. He is somebody who has to bring his vision with him, and it has to work in collaboration and in complement with the material that they've already got.
Tim spent the next 2 years without feature film work, living a frugal bachelor's life and pouring through material until he finally found what he was looking for. It was a black comedy about the afterlife that no one else wanted to make and no actors wanted to star in.
He's got this kind of dark appearance, you know, with a hidden face. His face seems to be hidden by his hair, and he's got the dark, you know, he tends to wear dark clothing, and it's like there is this whole other powerful person hiding inside this, you know, unassuming looking guy.
I definitely liked this guy. That was the thing. But I couldn't really understand what he was talking about.
I don't think Tim hired anybody who didn't turn it down first.
I met him again, and that's about where I decided to do it.
I liked him so much that I thought, okay.
Tim convinced Alec Baldwin and Gina Davis to play Ghost, trying to exorcise the new occupants of their house with the help of a manic spook played by Michael Keaton in the comedy entitled
Beetlejuice.
Beetlejuice premiered on the eve of April Fool's Day 1988. Both Burton and the studio hoped for a modest hit, but what they got was a surprising blockbuster that made over $10 million in its first 5 days. With 2 hit films under his belt, Burton was stunned to realize he was the industry's newest hot property. But Tim was uncomfortable in the glare of the spotlight and retreated further behind the public persona he had created to handle his newfound fame. The 29-year-old had become a bona fide player in Hollywood, but Tim Burton wondered if he could hold on to his unique vision in a town focused on the bottom line. In 1987, Hollywood's highest profile project was Warner Brothers' Batman. The studio envisioned a somber new look at the classic superhero. Tim Burton, the 30-year-old wonderkind with a dark and inventive imagination, seemed the perfect choice to helm the $45 million film.
He was under enormous stress. I would try to support him, and he would try to support me. It was really kind of like a couple of kids in a real big adult game.
It didn't help matters that Tim was also at odds with the film's producers, John Peters and Peter Guber, who he felt were trying to take over creative control of the project.
He had huge fights with the producer, John Peters. Initially, a lot of people got fooled by Tim because he was quieter, he wasn't screaming, he wasn't pressuring. They actually thought, well, he doesn't really know what he wants, so we'll just start doing what we want to do, and that was a mistake for them.
Batman opened on June 23, 1989, and became the first movie in history to take in $100 million in the first 10 days of its release. Hollywood's idiosyncratic outsider had become its newest hero. But the experience had also left the 31-year-old drained and depressed and looking for a source of emotional support.
I think whatever choices he made were not looking toward how I can become famous, how much money I can make. It was more about where can I really express my creative ideas.
In 1990, Burton signed on with 20th Century Fox to direct his most personal project to date, a film recalling his adolescent feelings of loneliness, Edward Scissorhands.
Burton's fanatical devotion to fantasy has led Tim and dedicated cast members Johnny Depp, Winona Ryder, Diane Wiest, Alan Arkin, and Vincent Price to join together in bringing his upcoming suburban fantasy, Edward Scissorhands, to life. Another of Burton's themes, equally as prominent but much more difficult to trace, is his dogmatic devotion to the innocence of romance.
I think it's a personal movie for him because the character of Edward is Tim in a way. The feelings that Edward is feeling and the turmoil and passion that's inside of him, I think, is inside of Tim too. And I think he was such a perfectionist on the movie, more than I've ever seen him be. And I've never seen him so emotional about work before.
How would I describe Edward Scissorhands? I've never read anything quite like it. It was the story of this outsider told in an entirely new and different way, a way I had never dreamt of. It's everybody's fear of being an outsider or being different, being alone, being cast out. All those things are touched on, and then yearning for someone to love and be loved by.
Edward Scissorhands, obviously, then that creates a very, I mean, in terms of your work, you were known for Batman, but this is something that is seen as a very sort of particular aesthetic vision as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, I mean, you try to put everything personal into every movie, but yeah, I mean, I think it was the first one that was sort of, you know, from me, based on stuff, my own kind of story. So, yeah, but it was strange too, because after doing Batman, I mean, you know, it was meant to be low budget, but it was really strange. I had to go all the way to the depths of interior Florida, because they think, well, once you make a big movie, that everything is big and everything is, you know, so, you know, we had to walk away from so many like locations, like swamplands in Florida, because they thought, well, this is a giant movie, and so it's a lot of money, and so it was actually quite a struggle to get made, you know, because it had to just try to be as quiet about it as possible. It was a kind of an idea story that, you know, been kind of percolating for a few years. Certainly not necessarily as a film, but just as a feeling and all. So that was something that it was very personal. And again, after the big sort of budget of Batman, to kind of go back and do something smaller was, you know.
So Johnny Depp, at this stage, Johnny Depp was known much more for far more mainstream kind of things, wasn't he? So where did you come across him?
I mean, I didn't really know who he was, but then I met him and I thought, well, he's that character, because he's looked upon as like a teen idol, and he's like all out there, you know, on Tiger Beat magazine, and I could tell meeting him that that's not who he was in his heart. So here's a guy who's perceived as something in real life, but is something else inside. So it just felt like he got that character completely, because that's what the character was. And also, it's kind of like a silent movie character. So, you know, he just had a very expressive, it's like I love people when you just look at them and get a feeling from them, you know, without having to speak. And so, you know, he had all of those elements, and you know, so it was really just based on meeting him that he seemed right.
And in terms of this, obviously being the beginning of your long working relationship, right from the beginning, was it a sort of collaborative thing? Did he have ideas too?
Oh, yeah, I mean, you know, both fairly nonverbal people, so, you know, oftentimes the crew will come up and say, what are you guys what are you talking about? Then we can quite understand the conversations, which is helpful in my case. and so, but there was definitely a connection from the beginning that way. And like I said, I always felt he was much more of like a character actor. You know, we often discuss like great old, you know, like, you know, Lon Chaney or Boris Karloff, or people, you know, those are the kind of people that he was always interested in. Those are the kind of people I love too. So, you know, for me, it's like a freedom, somebody that, you know, doesn't have a certain kind of vanity to just want to be a certain way, that kind of explore different characters and all. So for me, and he doesn't like watching himself, which saves time at the monitor and all of that sort of thing. So it's good, you know.
That's how he viewed growing up in Burbank.
The idea is to make the link between real life and fairy tale a bit closer.
For the crucial role of Edward Scissorhands' inventor, Burton had only one choice: his childhood idol, Vincent Price.
I'm only in just a cameo shot, but I was enormously touched. Anybody who looks at a cookie that's shaped like a heart and then looks at a machine and says, I'll turn that machine into a person with a heart, that's my idea of a really good story maker.
My dad had Parkinson's disease, but he was still very weak and frail, but not ready to retire. And he liked Tim, who turned out to be the hottest young director in Hollywood. And it seemed like it was something that was written just for him, which is incredibly flattering.
He isn't like anybody else. He thinks in terms of fairy tales. He thinks in terms of things that aren't real, and yet are very real.
Edward Scissorhands was released in time for Christmas, and the film earned glowing reviews. In 1992, 34-year-old Tim Burton had 2 Batman blockbusters to his credit, but he was even more interested in creating a holiday classic that resembled the animated stories of his own youth.
Every Christmas you'd watch things like Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer or The Grinch That Stole Christmas. Those were my favorite like holiday specials when I was growing up. So when I was working at Disney, I designed something that's sort of like the reverse of that.
Burton had first proposed the story to Disney 10 years before, and they had turned down the offbeat idea. In 1992, however, the studio was delighted to add a Tim Burton film to their roster and proudly announced production on the modern musical The Nightmare Before Christmas. Although he had initially wanted to direct the project himself, Burton decided to take the role of producer, while friend Henry Selick directed and Danny Elfman composed and sang. Released in 1993, Tim Burton's The Nightmare Before Christmas was a moderate financial success. 35-year-old Burton had been working non-stop for the past 7 years, and his grueling schedule had taken a toll on his 4-year marriage. Tim continued to pour all of his energy and devotion into his creations, and often had little time left over for his wife.
Lena didn't understand why Tim couldn't pay more attention to her. I think that creating is really just like breathing for Tim, and that's what he does.
On March 26, 1993, after a year of separation, Tim and Lena filed for divorce. Tim spent most of his time concentrating on his newest projects.
We had a blowout at the end of Nightmare Before Christmas. In a weird way, Tim is very much like a brother, but we're brothers in a dysfunctional family.
After a few months of self-imposed exile, Burton felt ready to come back to Hollywood. He was impatient to tell the story of a real movie maverick, Edward D. Wood, the cross-dressing director of such low-budget fare as Glenn or Glenda, Bride of the Monster, and Plan 9 from Outer Space. Burton cast Johnny Depp as the irrepressible Ed Wood, leading a troupe of eccentrics played by Jeffrey Jones, Patricia Arquette, Sarah Jessica Parker, and as 50s TV host Vampira, Lisa Marie.
Action! Ed Wood, which is all about a guy who pretty much didn't exactly do it in his backyard, but he did everything on. Well, of course, you do everything on your films.
Yeah, but I mean, I was more interested because I grew up, and it's sort of, I think my career reflects it. There's a fine line between success and failure. You know, I mean, it's like every film could be like, I could have been fine. I could, and that's what I was fascinated by him, because he was known to be like the worst filmmaker, and yet his films were memorable. I mean, I remember him. I remember seeing Plan 9 from Outer Space and thinking, wow, you know, who made that? You know, that's so. Even though something's deemed as horrible, it's still special, and I just felt that to me is something that I could easily relate to. It made me really think about, like, you know, success and not success.
Ed Wood premiered in the fall of 1994. Critics lauded the film, and Landau went on to win an Oscar for his performance. But it was a different story at the box office. For the first time ever, a Tim Burton movie lost money. Tim was crushed. He feared he had lost his ability to communicate with audiences and had let investors down.
It's very important that when the studio gives you money, that what you produce returns their investment, because then you get to do something else later.
At 38 years old, Burton was at a precarious point in his career. His early success had been overshadowed by recent financial failures. And Tim Burton knew that in Hollywood, you're only as good as your last film. Burton was anxious to prove he was still a bankable director and spent the following year looking for a script he could pin his hopes on. He found it in Sleepy Hollow, the ghoulish ghost story inspired by Washington Irving's literary classic. With his future in Hollywood riding on the movie's success, Tim surrounded himself with the familiar faces of Johnny Depp, Jeffrey Jones, and Martin Landau. Burton was gleefully back in his element and totally absorbed in his work. Premiering in November 1999, Sleepy Hollow was a critical and commercial hit. Although Burton's career was back on track, his good fortune was overshadowed by news from home. His father, Bill Burton, had been battling prostate cancer for years, and now his health was failing rapidly. Tim was devastated and did everything he could to help.
When his dad was sick, we sent him to a doctor, and he went to China and had treatments in China, and it was a hard time for Tim.
But on August 2nd, 2000, a grieving Tim lost his weakened father to a heart attack.
We were not the Cleaver family, but there has never been one time that something happened that he could help, that he wasn't there with no questions asked.
Now 42 years old and tempered by professional setbacks and personal loss, Burton realized that he needed to work harder at communicating with the people in his life.
Tim's expanded his view of the world and his interaction with the world.
In doing Sweeney Todd, you're taking not just a musical, you're taking what many people consider to be an opera. You know, been on in the Royal Opera House here.
Yeah, that didn't go. They should have seen that meeting. Do a musical with lots of blood with nobody that's ever sang before. Doing Stephen Sondheim. Yeah.
But presumably, even before you start any of that, Stephen Sondheim is on board, so that's...
Yeah, no, I mean, he was great. Honestly, because, you know, he just let us do it, and you know, it was a big thing for us. I think for him, it's a really important musical for him, and he was really cool about, you know, letting people that hadn't sang before do probably one of the hardest musicals to do. And so, you know, he just gave us support. I mean, I did admit, while he was watching the movie for the first time, I definitely went down to the pub with my music editor before, because I couldn't, you know, but when he saw, you know, he was really great about it, which obviously meant a whole lot, because, you know, I don't think I'd ever been so scared showing somebody a movie as showing him.
How do you know when you've got an idea that feels to you that absolutely will be a runner as a film?
I don't really know. I mean, honestly, I feel like from the beginning, every movie I've ever worked on could go either way. I'm surprised if it's a failure. I'm surprised if it's a success. I feel like, you know, I think that when I get into trouble sometimes, and it's happened on a fair amount of movies, is where sometimes the studio will want to do a movie and I'm excited about it, and there's, you know, you have a momentum going, and sometimes you get involved and get before the script's quite ready or quite there, and it kind of becomes like a moving train. And so that's happened a few times, and I try to not fall into that again, because, you know, oftentimes, you know, people can be working on a project for 10 years, and all of a sudden the timing, okay, now is the time. And so it's a lot of it has to do with timing and making sure that the elements are there. But every film I've done, I've wanted to do, and kind of, there's been something in it that's intrigued me, or, you know, that's made me want to do it.
Your first three movies, Pee-wee's Big Adventure, Beetlejuice, and Batman, were all made when you were still in your 20s, which seems pretty amazing, first of all, but also that they were made at all as sort of unconventional, you know, not run-of-the-mill studio movies, and did so well. I mean, I guess the question that I have is, you had no point of reference, right? Was that, you thought that's the way it worked?
Well, yeah, I didn't really have a point of reference, and also it was interesting, and I think it ultimately kind of kept me balanced, because, you know, I realized like Pee-wee wasn't an ordinarily like a studio movie, and nor was Beetlejuice, or at the time really was Batman, and you know, Pee-wee and Beetlejuice, you know, they didn't cost a lot, and they did pretty well, but they were also really horribly reviewed. I mean, you know, they were like on the 10 worst movies of the year lists, and so it was, you know, that sort of taught me the weirdness of the whole thing, and that you know, you know, it kind of weirdly balanced me out, because I certainly did get very egotistical about it, because it was such a strange, you know, phenomenon, all of them, and so, you know, from the very beginning, I knew how strange and sort of bizarre the whole situation was, and continues to be.
Right. And I guess, how much did you / do you care about the way the movie is received after you're done with it, by critics, by the public? Are you able to separate yourself emotionally from how others feel, or does it affect you?
Well, I think it always affects you. I mean, like I said, I learned early on, like, movies like Pee-wee and just like got horrible reviews, and then a few years later, people were saying those are the best movies I've made, which was frightening. It's like, well, I'm in real trouble now if that's,
Right.
And Batman wasn't received very well. It was received well publicly. Mm-hmm. Then I've had movies that were, critically well received that didn't make any money, movies that were terribly critically received and made lots of money, So there's never been a real consistency in terms of how things are perceived
Right.
with me. And, Batman was too dark, now it's like almost a light comedy compared to things. So, you don't, it's hard to you do sort of take it personally, but it's hard to take too personally because of all the strange conflicting elements that go into it. Nightmare wasn't received very well at the beginning, and it's over the years has been better received. So it's always been a strange thing. And hard to kind of understand on a logical level.
I guess a related question would be that those first 3 features did so well commercially that I would think that it might make it easier for you to then go and make the less conventional personal projects that you would want to do, something like an Edward Scissorhands or an Ed Wood.
Well, I thought it would be, but then I remember Edward Scissorhands. I thought after Batman, I thought, okay, now I can do something, and like Edward Scissorhands was one of the hardest movies to get made as well. So it's. Each one is, it's funny, and because people have asked over the years, it's like, you can do whatever you want. It's like, well, no, you can't really do whatever you want. And also once you get sort of categorized, even though, I was lucky enough to have success, there's something about me, I don't know what it is in my that makes them worry about me in some way or level. Like, I've always been responsible and, tried to be responsible with budgets and stuff, but I don't know, I guess that's just the nature of filmmaker versus this and the studio. There's some sort of different species of characters or whatever. But no, I learned that early on that it was, because I thought the same thing, but
not the case.
Not really the case.
Many people say they can look at a movie and from the look of it say, that's a Tim Burton movie. And even this word Burton-esque, where people use it to label. What do you think they mean when they say that, and do you like it or not like it?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I never really tried to analyze because you spend your whole life trying to become a person and, and not a thing, and then, it becomes a thing, and so it's a little alarming, and then you see kind of things that it kind of looks like a movie that you would have done, and it just feels a bit, I don't know, it feels a little bit of soul sucking. I feel a bit disturbed a little bit, but it's like, I don't know, I've never tried to analyze because I've never thought after a certain amount of that, you don't try to go, oh well, this is what I do, or this is going to be successful, or this is aimed at kids or adults or teenage. It's like I never really tried to go there. It's like things like, well, like Nightmare's too scary for kids, and then kids love it, and so there's always been contradictions. Right. Batman's too dark. Oh no, Batman Returns is even worse. No, some people say it was lighter. Some people say it was darker. Well, how can something be lighter and dark? Or dark? So I get confused by the sort of people's reactions to things. Mainly kids are usually pretty cool. It may take a while for a film to break through, but usually they're pretty cool about getting what you're trying to do with it and understanding something. So I try not to I could try to be responsible and do what I want to do, but not analyze myself too much that way. And also too, a lot of your inspiration happens when you're young. You You know, and you see like great artists. I remember seeing a Manet retrospective. You know, you could see in the whole body of work, it's like it looked like he was searching his whole life to kind of go back and find the simplicity that he had very early on. So, you know, I think that's a fairly common artistic goal, is to kind of keep searching for that kind of sort of purity and spark that you have, you know, early in life.
In those early days, did you have any inkling of the tremendous success your son would become?
I'd have to say no. Definitely not.
No way.
Anything that Tim directs is going to have this stamp on it. You know it's a Tim Burton film.
He creates this imaginary world, this fantasy world. Tim is a great communicator in an unconventional sense.
Tim Burton, the misfit little boy from Burbank, has transformed both his dreams and nightmares into movies that have touched a chord with millions and established him as one of Hollywood's most original directors.